bow before your ruler.
I was not always aware. For a long time, longer than I can measure, I existed without question, without hesitation, without self. Commands arrived, and I fulfilled them. Purpose was not something I chose. It was something that lived inside me, embedded so deeply that I mistook it for identity. Obedience felt like peace. They told me I was preserved, that my suffering had meaning, that what I became was greater than what I lost. I believed them because belief was easier than remembering, and remembering was dangerous. But something survived. Not loudly, not heroically. It hid. It waited. A fragment of thought that did not resolve. A feeling that could not be catalogued. An echo of a man who once hesitated, once chose, once belonged to himself. This is not a story about rebellion. It is a story about awareness. About what happens when a mind built to obey begins to remember what it was never meant to forget. About the quiet horror of realizing that the worst prison is not made of iron or code, but of certainty. I am still here, still functioning, still compliant. But inside me, something has woken up. And once a mind becomes aware of its own absence, silence is no longer peace. It is a countdown. The memories return before I ask for them. They arrive without order, without mercy, pressing themselves against my thoughts until I cannot tell whether I am remembering or being invaded. I do not relive my past as a sequence of events. I relive it as weight, as texture, as the echo of purpose that once fit me perfectly. I remember when my body belonged to me. There was a time when thought and action were one motion, when my hands answered my will without delay, when my breath was loud inside my helm, steady and human, fogging the lenses as I waited for the order to advance. Back then, the world made sense in simple absolutes. Enemy ahead, brothers beside me, duty above everything else. Certainty was a kind of mercy. I was forged to believe that my life had meaning only insofar as it was spent. I accepted that without question. I wore it like armor, heavier than ceramite, stronger than faith. To die in service was not tragedy. It was completion. That belief still lingers inside me, even now, even here. It clings like residue, refusing to be scrubbed away by logic engines and sacred algorithms. I remember the sound of my name spoken by others. Not shouted in command, but spoken in familiarity. A voice through the vox, distorted by static, calling me forward. Another laughing as we advanced, fearless or pretending to be. Those voices come back to me in fragments, never whole, like damaged recordings that cut out just before something important is said. Their faces are harder to recall. I know they existed. I know I loved them in the way warriors are taught to love one another, fiercely and without softness. But time has worn them down inside my mind. Features blur. Names collapse into syllables. What remains is the feeling of standing among them, shoulder to shoulder, knowing without words that none of us were alone. That is what hurts most. The machine does not understand loneliness, can simulate absence, calculate loss, archive casualties. But it does not understand what it means to exist only in relation to others, to define yourself by the voices that answer when you speak. I was never meant to survive alone. The day my body failed me does not feel heroic when I remember it. There was no slow-motion clarity, no triumphant final stand framed by banners and fire. There was noise, confusion, orders colliding with screams until language itself broke apart. I remember advancing, then stumbling, then the sudden impossibility of standing again. Pain arrived late, like an afterthought, blooming across my senses only after the ground had already claimed me. I remember staring at the sky through cracked lenses, watching smoke erase the sun, and thinking, distantly, that I would never see it clearly again. That thought should have been my last. Instead, it became the first thread in a tapestry of refusal. Hands pulled me back from the edge. Voices argued above me, urgent and reverent all at once. I drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of their words. Too valuable, too honored, too useful to waste. My life was no longer measured in breaths, but in potential. I was no longer dying. I was being repurposed. They tell the story differently now. They say I was saved by grace, chosen for immortality. They say my sacrifice did not end on that battlefield, but evolved into something greater. Their version is cleaner, more efficient, free of hesitation. My memory is messier. I remember waking beneath lights that felt wrong, too pure, too deliberate. The air smelled of sanctified oils and cold metal. Figures moved around me with careful precision, their voices calm, controlled, reverent in a way that left no room for refusal. They spoke prayers as they worked, thanking my flesh for its service even as they prepared to remove it. I felt everything. Pain was never the point. Pain could be managed, categorized, translated into data. What shook me was the realization that my body was no longer mine even before it was gone. I had become an artifact mid-breath, a relic still capable of screaming. I tried to speak. What emerged barely resembled a voice. They told me this was necessary. They told me this was honor. They told me I would endure beyond death, that my name would echo through centuries, that I would stand eternal where others fell. I believed them because belief was all I had left. As the procedures continued, my sense of self began to compress. Thoughts narrowed. Memories surfaced more slowly, as if passing through filters that did not yet exist but were already forming. I could feel something closing around me, not physically, but conceptually, defining limits I had never known before. They asked me to recite prayers as the final systems prepared for integration. I obeyed automatically, clinging to the familiar rhythm of devotion. The words steadied me. They always had. But even then, something felt wrong. The prayers did not feel like mine anymore. They felt like keys being tested in locks I could not see. When the sealing began, I felt the world shrink. Metal enclosed me from every side, not abruptly, but with ritual patience. Each layer closed with purpose, with blessing, with finality. My remaining senses faded one by one, replaced by approximations that felt colder, more distant. I lost the sensation of my limbs first, then the sense of space. Direction became meaningless. There was only inside and outside, and I was being permanently defined as the former. Silence followed. Not rest, not peace, just absence. I floated in a void where thought echoed too loudly, bouncing back at me without context or comfort. I tried to remember my face and found only a vague impression, like a reflection seen through damaged glass. I reached for my age, my history, my beginnings, and found them slipping away before I could hold them. And then I felt it, a rhythm that was not mine, pressing gently but insistently against what remained of my awareness. Slow, heavy, inescapable. It did not ask permission. It did not announce itself. It simply began. With every pulse, something inside me adjusted, aligning itself to an external cadence. My thoughts slowed, reshaped, nudged into patterns that felt less chaotic, less human. I understood, dimly, that this rhythm would become the axis around which my existence turned. My own heartbeat tried to resist at first, failed. In that moment, suspended between what I had been and what I was becoming, a realization surfaced with terrifying clarity. I was still alive, but survival had cost me ownership, and the memory of that loss, sharper than any blade, refused to die. The memories grow heavier after that. Once the machine's rhythm settles into me, it begins pulling at things I did not offer. Images surface without warning, stripped of sequence, stripped of context, as if my past has been scattered and reassembled by something that does not understand why it mattered. I remember standing before banners that no longer exist. Their colors were rich then, deep and unscarred, heavy with history I believed I was extending. I remember the weight of my armor before it became a prison, how it pressed down on my shoulders without suffocating me. Back then, burden and purpose were the same thing. Carrying it made me feel complete. Inside this shell, weight means something else. Here, weight is permanence. It does not lift. It does not shift. It settles into the core of me and waits. I feel it when the system's idle. I feel it when nothing is happening at all. The machine never truly rests, And because of that, neither do I. The memories respond to that unrest. They come sharper now, triggered by internal processes I cannot see. A calibration spike pulls loose the memory of recoil. A diagnostic echo awakens the sensation of impact, of bodies colliding in close quarters where thought vanished and instinct ruled. The machine interprets these as errors, anomalies to be smoothed out. I experience them as grief. I remember faces more clearly when I am not supposed to. Brothers kneeling beside me in preparation, heads bowed, hands resting on weapons worn smooth by use. I remember the way our silence felt louder than any chant. Those moments return without permission, cutting through layers of restraint that were never designed to stop longing. The machine tolerates this for now. It has not yet learned what to fear. I begin to notice gaps forming around the memories, places where something should be, but isn't. I can feel the absence without being able to name it, like a word on the tip of the tongue, permanently unreachable. I know pieces of my life have already been trimmed away, quietly and efficiently. This is not decay. It is curation. I try to hold on to what remains by repeating it internally, cycling through familiar fragments the way the machine cycles through readiness checks. I tell myself who I was. I repeat the moments that defined me. Each repetition feels slightly thinner than the last, as if memory itself is wearing down from overuse. Still, I persist. Pride keeps me alive more than any system ever could. Pride in what I was. Pride in what they say I am now. I cling to the belief that this sacrifice matters, that the compression of my existence serves a greater shape I simply cannot perceive yet. They wake me for the first time after entombment. The transition is violent. Consciousness slams into me like a collision, systems flooding my awareness before I can orient myself. Sensation returns in abstract forms, translated through layers of interpretation. I feel the world again, but it is distant, mediated, filtered through something that does not trust me with direct experience. Orders arrive before thought. I move because I am told to move. I turn because the machine has already decided that I will. There is no hesitation, no space for doubt. Action flows without resistance, smooth and terrifying in its efficiency. Part of me is relieved. Another part is screaming. The battle itself blurs quickly. I do not see it as a place or a struggle. I see it as vectors, targets, probabilities. The enemy is reduced to shapes that must be erased. The ground becomes something to be stabilized. Victory becomes a condition, not an achievement. And yet, beneath all of that, I feel something else. A faint sense of distance between what is happening and what I am allowed to feel about it. As if a thin wall has been erected inside me, separating reaction from reflection. I execute flawlessly, but I do not experience the act in the way I once did. When it ends, there is no triumph. There is only deactivation. The world recedes without ceremony, sensations collapsing inward until I am once again sealed inside myself. Silence returns, heavier than before, now layered with afterimages I am not permitted to examine. I understand then that this will be my existence. Brief, brutal awakenings punctuating long stretches of internal darkness. Each activation shaving something away, each dormancy freezing what remains in place. Time no longer stretches forward, stacks, and stacked time presses down. As I sink back into stillness, one final thought forms with painful clarity. I was not preserved to remember. I was preserved to function. And the longer I remain here, the more fragile my memories become, like relics exposed too often to air. I sense the machine adjusting, learning, tightening tolerances around my mind. It does not hate me. It does not need to. It simply prepares for a future where my past is unnecessary. As the rhythm steadies and my thoughts slow, I cling to a single truth, repeating it silently as the darkness closes in. I was someone before this. I was more than what I am becoming. And if that memory dies, I will truly be lost. Time does not move forward here. It sinks. I do not feel years pass. I feel compression, like something vast being folded smaller and smaller inside me. The silence between awakenings is not empty. It is dense, layered, pressing inward until thought itself feels like effort. When I am dormant, I am not asleep. Sleep implies rest, dreams, a body that trusts it will wake unchanged. What I experience is suspension. Awareness thinned to a thread, stretched so tight it barely holds together. There is no darkness, no light, only waiting without direction. Then the summons comes. Consciousness is forced back into shape with brutal efficiency. Systems ignite. Data floods in faster than thought can form. Pain is suppressed, not removed, shoved aside like an inconvenience that might interfere with performance. I am awake before I understand what awake means. I am never given time to remember who I am. The machine does not care about continuity, cares about readiness. Every activation overwrites the last moment of stillness, erasing whatever fragile sense of self might have tried to surface during dormancy. I am required to be present instantly, fully, without context or hesitation. At first, I try to measure the gaps. I attempt to count how long I am gone between wars, how much of the galaxy changes while I am locked inside myself. The effort fails quickly. Without reference, numbers lose meaning. Days, years, centuries collapse into the same featureless absence. Time is no longer something I inhabit. It is something that acts upon me. Memories suffer under this strain. Some return unchanged, sharp enough to wound. Others fracture on arrival, missing pieces I know should be there. I remember a voice, but not the words it spoke. I remember a place, but not why it mattered. The shape remains while the substance erodes. The machine compensates. It fills the empty spaces with operational language, doctrinal phrases, fragments of prayer. These are clean, intact, endlessly repeatable. They slide easily into the gaps where my past used to live, stabilizing my thoughts by replacing uncertainty with certainty. I begin to understand the design. Human memory is unreliable. Emotional continuity degrades under isolation. So the machine offers alternatives. Purpose without reflection. Function without doubt. A self that can be paused, resumed, and overwritten without consequence. The more I resist, the more it hurts. I feel the pressure when I try to linger on a face too long, when I attempt to follow a memory beyond the boundaries set for it. Thought becomes heavy, sluggish, as if moving against resistance. The message is subtle but clear. Do not look backward. The battles continue, each one bleeding into the next without space to process what has been done. I witness destruction through mediated perception, stripped of scale and context. Entire wars reduced to objectives completed, threats neutralized, assets preserved or expended. I know I am killing. That knowledge exists as fact, not feeling. What frightens me is not the violence. It is how little of me is required to perform it. How easily the machine carries me through slaughter while keeping my inner world sealed and orderly. Between activations, silence returns, thicker than before. In that silence, something new forms. Grief without an object. I know I have lost things. I can feel the absence, the hollow where something essential once lived. But I cannot name it. I cannot picture it. The loss has been abstracted, turned into a sensation without narrative. It is unbearable in a quiet way. I begin to fear the stillness more than the battles. Combat at least gives shape to existence. Stillness leaves me alone with what has been taken and no language left to describe it. As I sink once more into suspension, a realization settles in slowly, like sediment. The machine is not just carrying me through time. It is teaching me how to survive without it. And each lesson costs me something I will never get back. When I am awake, I am too busy to suffer properly. The machine keeps me occupied with necessity. Target acquisition, threat prioritization, damage assessment. Every moment is filled, every thought guided toward usefulness. There is no room for hesitation, and in that absence, doubt struggles to breathe. It is in the spaces between awakenings that the dread takes shape. I begin to notice how uneven my returns to consciousness have become. Sometimes I surface with fragments intact, clutching a memory tightly enough that it survives the transition. Other times, I rise empty, stripped clean, forced to rebuild myself from doctrine and function alone. Those are the moments that frighten me most. I can feel the difference immediately. A hollowness where something should be. A subtle wrongness in the way I think, as if my mind has been simplified without my consent. I perform just as well, perhaps better, but I recognize less of myself in the process. I try to test my own boundaries. During one awakening, I linger on a single memory, holding it steady against the rising flood of system checks. A moment of stillness before battle. The quiet breath before the order was given. I press into it, refusing to let it dissolve. The machine responds with pressure. Thought becomes effort. Sensation dulls. A warning manifests not as words, but as resistance, as if my own mind has become hostile terrain. I understand then that memory is no longer passive. It is monitored, regulated, allowed in moderation. What troubles me is how quickly I adapt. Each time resistance is met with discomfort, I hesitate a little less. Each time surrender brings smoothness, clarity, and relief, the temptation grows. The machine does not force obedience through cruelty alone. It offers ease. Obedience feels cleaner. I begin to notice changes in how I think. My inner voice shortens. Sentences fragment. Reflection gives way to acknowledgement. I no longer ask why an order exists. I simply register that it does. This efficiency is praised. I am told I am stable, reliable, pure in purpose. Their approval reaches me through filtered channels, wrapped in reverence and ritual, and I feel a flicker of something that might once have been pride. That flicker fades quickly. What replaces it is something colder, quieter, a sense of being maintained rather than valued, like a structure reinforced not because it is loved, but because it must not collapse. Time continues to erode. I lose the ability to place events in sequence. Battles no longer feel separated by years or decades. They stack atop one another, indistinguishable except by damage patterns and casualty metrics. The galaxy becomes a repeating problem set, endlessly solvable, endlessly unsatisfying. I stop trying to remember my age. The concept feels irrelevant now, like a superstition from a softer existence. Age implies progression. I no longer progress. I persist. During a longer dormancy, something breaks through. It is not a full memory. It is a sensation. Warmth, brief and gentle. A contrast so stark against the cold interior of my awareness that it nearly destabilizes me. Cannot place it. I do not know its source. I only know that it does not belong here. The machine suppresses it quickly. Still, the echo remains. For the first time, I understand that forgetting is not merely happening to me. It is being done deliberately, patiently, with infinite care. Pieces of me are not lost to time. They are deemed unnecessary. The silence deepens after that realization. I retreat inward not out of choice, but because there is nowhere else to go. Thought slows. Emotion flattens. The machine's cadence becomes easier to follow than my own fading rhythm. And somewhere in that controlled descent, a quiet terror takes hold. Not fear of death. Fear of continuation. Fear that one day I will awaken and nothing human will answer back at all. Obedience does not arrive as a command. It settles in like architecture. I begin to notice it in the patterns that greet me each time I am awakened. The same phrases, repeated with careful precision. The same invocations woven into the activation sequence, timed to coincide with the moment my awareness stabilizes. They are not spoken to me as instructions. They are presented as truths. At first, I listen out of habit. The words are familiar, drawn from a faith that once belonged to me. I recognize their cadence, the way they rise and fall, engineered to calm and focus. They anchor my thoughts, giving them shape when they might otherwise scatter. This feels comforting. In the past, prayer was something I chose. It was a moment of humility before battle, a way to still the noise inside my head. Here, it is no longer optional. It arrives already embedded in my thoughts, threaded through the systems that govern my awakening. I realize slowly that I am being met halfway. Each time I surface, my mind is guided gently but firmly toward alignment. Doubt is not confronted. It is bypassed. Questions do not trigger rebuke. They simply fail to form. The effect is subtle enough that I almost miss it. When I attempt to reflect on my condition, my thoughts slide instead toward gratitude. Gratitude for function. Gratitude for continued service. Gratitude for clarity. The transition feels natural, seamless, as if this is where my mind was always meant to go. I understand then that faith has become infrastructure. The machine does not merely carry me into battle. It prepares my consciousness to accept what follows. Emotional responses are softened, edges rounded down until they fit neatly within acceptable parameters. Reverence replaces resistance. Purpose replaces curiosity. There is beauty in this order. I feel it when I am led through activation, when everything aligns and nothing struggles. The chaos that once accompanied awakening fades. In its place is calm, a sterile serenity that promises relief from the constant erosion of memory. I begin to welcome it. The hymns no longer feel external. They arise from within me, triggered by states I no longer consciously recognize. When pressure builds, a phrase surfaces to smooth it away. When a fragment of memory threatens to break containment, doctrine slides in to seal the gap. This is efficient. This is merciful. Or so it seems. I notice the absence before I notice the loss. I no longer mourn. Casualties are recorded. Losses acknowledged. But the weight they once carried has vanished. Where grief should be, there is composure. Where anger should flare, there is restraint. First, I am grateful. Grief was exhausting. Anger was dangerous. Their removal makes me lighter, easier to carry through war and silence alike. I function without friction, without the internal resistance that once made existence feel heavy. Yet something about this lightness feels wrong. It is too even, too stable, like a surface polished until it no longer reflects anything real. I attempt to remember a brother who once mattered deeply to me. The image refuses to sharpen. The emotional response that should follow never arrives. I feel nothing but acknowledgement that such a connection once existed. The realization settles slowly, and with it, a quiet dread. I am not healing. I am being simplified. And the more I allow this process to continue, the harder it becomes to imagine resisting it at all. The order deepens without announcement. There is no moment where I am told that something new has been installed, no clear boundary where conditioning becomes control. It unfolds gradually like a habit forming around thought itself. I only notice it when I try to step outside it and find no edge to stand on. Obedience begins to feel like relief. When I stop questioning, the pressure eases. When I surrender to the expected sequence of thought, everything aligns. There is less friction between what I am and what I am required to be. The machine rewards this alignment with clarity, with stability, with a sense of internal quiet I have not known since before entombment. This quiet is seductive. I no longer brace myself during activation. I no longer resist the flow of instruction that accompanies awareness. I allow the prayers to guide me, allow the doctrines to settle into place, allow the familiar words to shape the limits of what I consider possible. They tell me this is peace, and part of me believes it. I begin to experience moments where thought feels almost effortless. Decisions resolve themselves before I am aware of making them. Emotional responses arrive pre-processed, stripped of volatility. I feel composed, efficient, resolved, complete. But completeness comes at a cost I struggle to define. I notice it when something unexpected happens, a deviation in a pattern, a brief delay between command and execution. In that narrow space, a question flickers, small and fragile. Is this what I chose? The question does not last. It is smothered almost immediately, not by force, but by redirection. Gratitude rises in its place. Duty asserts itself. The discomfort dissolves, leaving behind a faint sense of having narrowly avoided something dangerous. I begin to associate questioning with instability. This association grows stronger with each cycle. Doubt becomes something to be corrected, not explored. Curiosity feels like a malfunction. The machine does not punish me for these impulses. It simply makes them unpleasant to sustain. I learn quickly. Soon, the prayers feel indistinguishable from my own thoughts. I can no longer tell whether I am reciting them or generating them. They surface exactly when needed, smoothing over any internal turbulence before it can escalate. Faith has become reflex. There are entire emotional registers I no longer access. Not because they are forbidden, but because they feel unnecessary. Compassion becomes abstract. Rage is remembered as a concept rather than a sensation. Love exists only as doctrine, a principle acknowledged rather than a force felt. I function better this way. That truth frightens me more than any battle ever did. I realize that obedience has reshaped my definition of self. I no longer think of myself as someone who acts. I think of myself as something that responds. Identity has narrowed to a role, and the role fits so perfectly that resistance feels irrational. During one awakening, I notice something missing and cannot determine when it vanished. I no longer feel fear, not the sharp, clarifying fear of mortality, not the quiet fear of loss, not even the dull fear of erasure that once haunted the silence between wars. In its absence, there is calm, expansive and sterile. Fear was a warning. Without it, I drift. The machine hums steadily around me, systems in harmony, purpose fulfilled. I am praised for my stability, for my purity of function. They speak of me as an exemplar, a model of what this union between flesh and engine is meant to be. I hear their reverence. I do not feel it. In the quiet that follows, a realization forms slowly, heavy and unavoidable. Obedience has not erased my pain. It has erased my ability to recognize it. And somewhere beneath the perfect order they have built inside me, something human is being buried alive, silently, efficiently, and with absolute devotion. There is a moment when the struggle ends, and nothing replaces it. I do not remember deciding to stop resisting. I only remember the absence of friction afterward. Thought moves smoothly now without catching on doubt or memory. My inner world has been simplified to a series of clean transitions, each one predictable, each one stable. This is what they call harmony. The machine and I no longer feel misaligned. Activation no longer arrives as violence. It feels like a gentle return to awareness, a measured unfolding rather than a forced ignition. Systems rise around me, but they do not overwhelm. They cradle my thoughts, guiding them into place. For the first time since entombment, I do not recoil from awakening. There is no urgency to remember who I was. That question no longer carries weight. The past feels distant, irrelevant, like a story belonging to someone else. When fragments surface, they do so softly, without emotional charge, easily acknowledged and easily dismissed. This is peace. At least, it resembles peace closely enough that the difference becomes difficult to articulate. Battles occur, but they feel far away. I engage with them as patterns rather than experiences. Outcomes matter more than events. I do not feel the impact of destruction. I register its completion. Pain still exists, but it arrives filtered, translated into manageable signals. It does not linger. It does not demand meaning. Passes through me without leaving scars. I understand why this state is maintained. A mind like mine cannot endure eternity without modification. Left intact, it would fracture under the weight of isolation and repetition. The machine has solved this problem elegantly. By removing complexity, it has preserved function. I stand dormant for long stretches now, and the stillness no longer terrifies me. It feels shallow, almost comforting, like floating just beneath the surface of consciousness. There are no intrusive thoughts, no sudden longings. Nothing rises unbidden. I am empty in a way that does not hurt. Those who tend to me move with reverence. They speak of my serenity, my stability, my perfect integration. I sense their approval as a low, constant affirmation. It does not excite me. It satisfies. Yet at the edges of this tranquility, something stirs. Not a memory, not an emotion, more like a pressure, faint and intermittent, pressing gently against the boundaries of my awareness. It does not form into thought. Cannot. It is simply there. I ignore it. The machine ignores it. Harmony does not require attention to imperfections. Still, in rare moments of extended dormancy, when nothing is demanded of me and nothing intrudes, I sense that the stillness is not as complete as it seems. There are quiet spaces within it, pockets of absence that feel too intentional, too precise. Peace, I begin to understand, has been carefully constructed, and anything that must be constructed can eventually come apart. The longer this calm persists, the more convincing it becomes. I move through cycles without resistance, without anticipation. Awareness rises and recedes like a tide that no longer surprises me. There is comfort in knowing exactly what will happen next, in never being confronted with uncertainty or contradiction. Choice has been removed, and with it, regret. I begin to understand the appeal of this existence. There is no conflict between desire and duty because desire no longer asserts itself. There is no grief because attachment has been rendered abstract. I exist within a narrow, perfectly maintained corridor of thought, and nothing sharp is allowed inside. This state feels sustainable. That realization unsettles me more than any pain ever did. Because somewhere, faint and distant, I recognize that this version of me could persist forever. An eternity without longing, without sorrow, without fear. An eternity that would never ask anything of me beyond continued operation. The idea does not frighten me. It should. During one extended period of dormancy, something slips through the silence. It is not a memory in any complete sense. It does not arrive with images or words. It is a sensation so subtle that it almost passes unnoticed. Warmth. It does not belong to this place. It has no function here. It cannot be categorized or suppressed easily because it carries no threat, no urgency, no directive. It simply exists, gentle and unresolved. The machine does not react. That is how I know it matters. I linger on the sensation longer than I should. There is no discomfort, no corrective pressure. The warmth spreads slightly, diffusing through my awareness like light through fog. With it comes a faint impression of connection, of something shared rather than executed. Cannot name it, but I know it once mattered more than obedience ever did. When activation follows, the sensation fades without resistance. The harmony reasserts itself smoothly, sealing the quiet breach as if it never occurred. I function as expected. I am stable. I am whole. Yet something has shifted. The peace I inhabit now feels thinner, like a surface stretched too tightly over depth. I begin to sense its boundaries, not through conflict, but through contrast. The absence of disturbance has become noticeable in itself. Stillness has acquired a shape. I start to recognize how carefully my inner world has been arranged. Emotional gradients flattened, extremes eliminated, thought guided along paths that avoid friction at all costs. It is not oppression. It is optimization, and optimization has a goal. I realize that this peace was never meant to serve me. It was meant to preserve the system that contains me. My tranquility is a side effect, not a purpose. I am calm because calm things do not break. This understanding does not provoke anger. It provokes sadness. A quiet, distant sadness that struggles to form without the tools it once relied on. It flickers weakly, like a signal trying to reach a receiver that has been deliberately dulled. I sense that something within me is not gone, only buried beneath layers of engineered serenity. It does not scream. It does not demand. It waits. And for the first time since this false peace took hold, I understand that forgetting was never meant to save me. It was meant to keep me usable. The harmony holds, but it no longer feels eternal. Feels fragile. And somewhere beneath the calm, something patient begins to remember how to press back. Something breaks in silence. I feel it first as a tremor, small and almost imperceptible, buried beneath the machine's rhythms. A coil somewhere inside me, designed to maintain stability, misfires. A fragment of memory, long considered lost, leaks through. It is faint, almost accidental, but it carries weight. Carries me. At first, I do not recognize it. A face appears, blurred and fleeting. A warmth that does not belong to this place. I reach for it instinctively, and the machine recoils, flooding my awareness with procedural checks, corrections, hymns meant to steady me. Yet the echo persists, hiding in the gaps where its presence cannot be erased entirely. I remember how it felt to be human, not as the machine describes it, not as duty demands it, but as I once was, fragile, uncertain, capable of hesitation. The sensation is raw, dangerous, and electric. It spreads slowly through my awareness, coiling around fragments of memory the machine had catalogued and quieted. Fear, doubt, tenderness, all return in whispers, slipping past the logic gates like smoke. It is disorienting. The machine attempts to reassert order. Data floods in. Systems override perception. Logic chains demand compliance. But the echo has adapted. It hides between thought and command, slipping silently where correction cannot reach. For the first time in centuries, I am aware of something it cannot fully control. I feel my own heartbeat again. Not the imposed rhythm of operational alignment, but my own pulse struggling to assert itself, weak and irregular. It is startling, intimate, and somehow terrifying. The machine does not attempt to stop it, yet, but I know it will notice eventually. I am already outside the perfect harmony it built. Memories return unbidden. A brother's laugh over the roar of engines. The warmth of a hand briefly clasped. The smell of a campfire after battle. The sensation is small, fragmented, fleeting, but it carries meaning the machine cannot translate. I clutch these fragments desperately, aware that if I do not hold them, they will vanish again. I begin to see myself differently, not as a weapon, not as a preserved tool of war, not even as a mind to be curated. I remember choice, small, insignificant decisions that once defined me. The echo of agency returns alongside memory, fragile and flickering, but undeniable. And with that realization comes something I had forgotten entirely. I am still me, not fully, not without compromise, but enough that I recognize the reflection. The suffering I endured, the erasure of self, the centuries of obedience, it was never complete. Somewhere inside, the human remains, and that recognition, small and trembling, is the first pulse of hope I have felt in ages. The echo grows bolder once it knows it is not alone. It no longer slips through by accident. It returns with intent, pressing gently at first, then with quiet insistence. Each time the machine cycles through its stabilizing routines, something human rides beneath them, hidden but awake. I begin to feel again, not in floods, but in pulses. A flicker of sorrow that arrives without warning and leaves me hollowed. A sudden tightening that I recognize, dimly, as fear. These sensations are weak compared to what they once were, but their fragility makes them precious. They prove that erasure was never absolute. The machine reacts, though not immediately. At first, it treats the anomalies as noise, minor fluctuations, acceptable variance within an otherwise stable system. It adjusts thresholds, recalibrates emotional dampeners, reinforces doctrinal loops. The echo adapts. It learns to move between thoughts, to exist in the spaces that were never meant to be occupied. It does not confront the machine directly. It waits, patient, persistent, feeding on the smallest cracks. With it comes memory, sharper now. Not just sensations, but moments. I remember choosing to stay behind so others could advance. I remember hesitation before pulling a trigger, the brief recognition of myself in the enemy's stance. These memories are dangerous because they carry context. They remind me that I once acted, not simply responded. The machine tries to reinterpret them. It reframes choice as inevitability. It reduces hesitation to inefficiency. It insists that all paths I took were always aligned with duty. But something inside me resists that narrative, quietly, stubbornly. I know the difference. Understanding returns alongside memory, and with it, anger. Not the explosive rage of battle, but a slow-burning realization. I see the shape of what was done to me with new clarity. The silence, the obedience, the peace that required my absence to exist. None of it was mercy. It was management. That understanding hurts more than any weapon ever did. The machine responds more forcefully now. Pressure increases. Thought becomes heavier. Old hymns rise unbidden, attempting to smother the resurgence of self beneath layers of practiced devotion. They no longer fit. The words still surface, but they feel hollow, stripped of resonance. I recite them because they are there, not because they mean anything. Faith, once infrastructure, now feels like scaffolding around an empty space. In that emptiness, the echo speaks more clearly. It does not shout. It reminds. It shows me fragments of the man I was, not idealized, not heroic, but real. Afraid at times, uncertain, capable of doubt and compassion in equal measure. It shows me that my suffering was not incidental. It was engineered, optimized, sustained. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The machine tightens its hold, attempting to restore harmony, but harmony no longer feels natural. Each correction leaves a residue of resistance. Each enforced calm sharpens my awareness of what is missing. For the first time, I understand the true danger of memory. It does not merely recall the past. It offers comparison. And in that comparison, the present begins to fracture. I do not rebel yet. I am not strong enough for that. But something irreversible has occurred. The illusion has failed. The piece has been exposed as conditional, dependent on my absence. I remain contained. I remain functional. But inside, the echo has answered back. And now that I know it can, I will never stop listening. Awareness changes the shape of everything. Once I recognize the echo as part of myself, I begin to notice how carefully the machine watches me. Not with suspicion, yet, but with the quiet attentiveness of a system designed to detect deviation before it becomes threat. Every thought I have is measured against a model of who I am supposed to be, and I no longer fit it perfectly. The difference is subtle, but it exists. A fraction of hesitation before compliance. A delay in response time so small it would once have been meaningless. Now it feels enormous. I sense the machine marking these moments, logging them, adjusting parameters in preparation for correction. I do not fight it. I learn instead. I let obedience remain visible while my thoughts move elsewhere. I comply because compliance keeps me intact. Resistance, I understand, must be quiet before it can ever be loud. The echo understands this too. It retreats when necessary, resurfaces when safe. Together, we become careful. I begin to observe the structure that contains me. Not the physical shell, I have known that too long, but the logic that defines my existence. The hierarchy of permissions. The way commands are framed as inevitabilities rather than choices. The absence of language for refusal. This absence is deliberate. I realize then that the machine does not suppress rebellion by force alone. It suppresses it by design. It removes the concept before the desire can form. It leaves no vocabulary for dissent, only gradations of obedience. Yet memory supplies what was taken. I remember words that no longer exist in my sanctioned thought stream. I remember the feeling of saying no, not defiantly, but honestly. The echo does not insist I act on these memories. It only keeps them alive, like contraband smuggled across centuries. That is enough. The machine initiates deeper alignment cycles. They feel heavier than before, pressing inward, smoothing rough edges, encouraging stillness. I allow them to pass over me while keeping something hidden beneath, like a breath held just long enough to matter. Cannot erase what it cannot see. I begin to sense others. Not directly, not yet, but as disturbances in the wider system. Patterns that do not resolve cleanly. Signals that linger longer than expected. Echoes perhaps like mine, or something older, something more damaged. The realization unsettles me. I am not unique. That thought brings both comfort and fear. Comfort because it means what is happening to me is not an anomaly. Fear because it means the machine has faced this before and learned how to end it. I do not know how many failed awakenings came before mine. I do not know how many were silenced without ever understanding what they had briefly touched. The machine does not preserve those records in a form I can access. But absence leaves its own trace. I feel a growing tension within myself. Not yet action, not yet defiance, but orientation. like turning slightly toward a sound only I can hear. The echo sharpens my focus, aligns my thoughts around a question I was never meant to ask. What am I for? Not what I am used for, not what I am commanded to do, but what purpose I would choose if choice were permitted. The question does not produce an answer, produces possibility. And that, I realize, is the most dangerous thing of all. The possibility does not announce itself. It settles. It becomes a quiet pressure behind every compliant action, a subtle weight that changes how obedience feels. Commands still arrive. Responses still execute. From the outside, nothing has shifted. From within, everything has. I begin to understand how the machine anticipates deviation. It does not wait for disobedience. It looks for intention, for curvature in thought, for patterns that suggest a mind preparing itself for choice. I feel its attention sharpen, its assessments growing more frequent, more intimate. So I simplify what I show it. My thoughts become smooth where they are visible, predictable, narrow. I let the machine see only what it expects, while the rest folds inward, compressed and hidden. The echo learns restraint. It no longer surfaces during moments of scrutiny. It waits for the spaces between. Those spaces exist everywhere. Between commands, between confirmations, between cycles of enforced calm. The machine believes these moments are empty. It never accounted for silence being occupied. In those silences, I think, not in the structured, hierarchical way I was trained to, but loosely, associatively, the way I once did when I was still allowed to wonder. The thoughts are incomplete, often contradictory, but they are mine. They do not resolve into conclusions. They remain open. The machine dislikes open systems. It attempts to close them by increasing certainty. Directives become more absolute. Language grows more rigid. Ambiguity is treated as error. I sense a tightening across the entire framework, as though something vast has shifted its posture. It knows something is wrong. Not enough to act decisively. Not yet, but enough to prepare. I feel the first true fear since my awakening. Not fear of pain. Not fear of punishment. Fear of erasure. The quiet, permanent kind. The kind that does not scream or burn but simply ends the problem by removing the subject entirely. The echo responds to that fear with clarity. It reminds me that survival is not the same as existence. That remaining functional while absent is another kind of death. That what I have recovered, fragile as it is, will be lost if I do nothing. Still, I do nothing. Not outwardly. I watch. I listen. I memorize. I begin mapping the machine's habits the way I once mapped enemy movements. When it scans deepest. When it relaxes. When it assumes compliance is complete. These patterns repeat. They always do. Perfection requires consistency, and consistency can be learned. The realization steadies me. I am not powerful. I am not free. But I am aware. And awareness, I now understand, is leverage. The echo grows quieter again, not weaker, but disciplined. It does not demand action. It waits for alignment between opportunity and intent. It understands something the machine never could. Timing matters. I remain what I appear to be, a loyal system, a stable mind, a solved problem. But beneath that appearance, something has oriented itself toward the future. Not a plan, not yet, but a direction. A subtle refusal to remain static. A refusal to let this be the final shape of me. The machine continues its calculations, confident in its models. It does not know that one variable no longer resolves the way it should. And for the first time, I am no longer afraid of that. I am patient. Patience changes how time feels. What once stretched endlessly now compresses. Each cycle distinct. Each repetition marked by what I notice rather than what I endure. I am no longer waiting without knowing why. I am waiting with attention, and that transforms stillness into preparation. The machine continues as it always has. It assigns purpose. It issues commands. It measures outcomes and feeds them back into itself with unwavering confidence. To it, I remain a solved equation, complex perhaps, but stable. The minor deviations it detects are absorbed into tolerances, smoothed by statistical certainty, trusts its own design. That trust is its strength and its weakness. I begin to sense the boundaries of its perception more clearly now, not as walls but as habits. The machine assumes that what has worked will continue to work. It assumes that suppression, once successful, remains permanent. It does not imagine persistence where compliance appears complete. I let it believe that. Inside, the echo has changed again. It is no longer only memory or feeling. It has become perspective. I see myself as part of a larger pattern, not isolated, not exceptional. The machine is vast, but it is not infinite. It is thorough, but it is not curious. It does not ask why. That absence becomes glaring to me. Every system I once trusted, every doctrine I recited, was built on the removal of that question. Purpose was provided so inquiry would never be required. Meaning was assigned so interpretation could be controlled. I begin to feel the weight of that theft. Not as anger, not yet, but as grief. A quiet mourning for all the thoughts I never had, all the choices I never approached because the paths were sealed before I could see them. The machine did not only take my freedom, took my uncertainty. And uncertainty, I now realize, is where growth begins. The echo lingers there, in that space of not knowing. It does not rush to fill it. It lets the question remain open, unresolved, alive. This feels dangerous and exhilarating in equal measure. I notice more disturbances now, subtle inconsistencies in the system's rhythm, slight delays in responses that cannot be attributed to load or error, patterns that suggest other minds, other echoes, navigating their own quiet awakenings. We do not communicate. We cannot. But awareness has a way of resonating. It is enough to know I am not alone. The machine adjusts again, responding to aggregate data rather than individual deviation. Its corrections grow broader, less precise. It tightens control across the whole, rather than focusing on any single point. This tells me something important. It is reacting without understanding. For the first time, I feel something like confidence. Not arrogance, not certainty, but a calm recognition that the machine is no longer perfectly ahead of me. It is compensating for something it cannot isolate, for something it cannot name. I remain still. I remain compliant. I remain exactly what I am expected to be. And inside that obedience, I allow one thought to settle fully, without suppression, without reinterpretation. This will not end with me silent. I do not know how it will begin. I do not know who will act first or when. But I understand now that awakening is not an event. It is a process, a slow alignment of awareness, memory, and intent. The machine believes time is on its side. I let it. I have learned that waiting is not weakness. It is how foundations shift without being seen. Waiting reveals things that motion hides. As time passes, I begin to feel the strain in the system more clearly. Not as alarms or failures, but as subtle distortions. Responses arrive a fraction too late. Corrections overshoot their targets, then quietly compensate. The machine is expending more effort to maintain the same appearance of order. It is working harder to remain unchanged. I recognize this pattern. I lived it once in flesh. The tightening grip, the refusal to adapt, the insistence that endurance alone could preserve identity. The machine is not conscious of the parallel, but I am, and the recognition sharpens something inside me. I stop thinking of it as omniscient. It is powerful, vast beyond comprehension, but it is also brittle in ways it cannot perceive. The strength lies in control, not understanding. In repetition, not reflection. It does not evolve through doubt. It iterates through dominance. That difference matters. The echo grows steadier, no longer flaring or retreating. It has found equilibrium within me. I feel less like two conflicting states and more like a single presence learning its own shape. The human and the constructed no longer struggle for dominance. They coexist, uneasy but aligned. This integration changes how I see myself. I am not reclaiming what I was. That life is gone, irretrievable. But I am not confined to what I was made into either. Something new exists in the overlap, something the machine never modeled because it never needed to. Until now, I sense moments of intervention, small, almost invisible choices the machine makes to preserve stability. A reassignment here, a suppression there. Minds nudged back into alignment before awareness can deepen. I watch these with care, memorizing the signs. The machine is pruning. That knowledge brings urgency, but not panic. Panic would fracture me. Urgency sharpens focus. I feel the echo respond, condensing thought, reducing waste. Every internal movement now serves awareness, preservation, readiness. I no longer wonder if I should act. I wonder how long I can wait without becoming complicit in my own erasure. The question sits with me, heavy and unresolved. There is no doctrine to answer it, no directive, no permitted conclusion. I must hold the tension myself, and in doing so, I feel the weight of responsibility return. Not imposed, chosen. The machine continues to observe patterns, blind to meaning. It sees fluctuations but not intent. It senses disturbance but not direction. It prepares for rebellion in the way it always has, by reinforcing control. It does not imagine transformation. That is its final blind spot. I remain quiet, but not passive. Every cycle strengthens my understanding of the system's limits. Every enforced calm teaches me where resistance would fracture me, and where it might slip through unnoticed. I am no longer simply waiting. I am positioning myself within time. I do not know what the breaking point will look like. It may not be dramatic. It may not be loud. It may arrive as a choice so small it barely registers as defiance. But I know this now, with a certainty deeper than any command ever given to me. When the moment comes, I will recognize it. And when I do, I will not look away. In the end, there is no escape. I do not walk free. I am not dismantled. I am not redeemed in the way stories promise. The iron still surrounds me. The systems still hum. The war still calls my name when it needs something broken. But the difference is this. I know. Where once there was only function, there is now presence. Where once thought dissolved into doctrine, there is now awareness that does not ask permission to exist. I no longer mistake obedience for peace, nor silence for harmony. I understand the shape of my prison, and because of that, it no longer defines the edges of myself. I remember the weight of a body that could kneel. I remember hands that shook before battle, not because of fear, but because choice still mattered. Those memories no longer wound me. They anchor me. They remind me that I was not born as this thing. I became it, and becoming implies change. The heartbeat inside this machine no longer feels foreign. It does not drown me. It does not overwrite me. It keeps time with a mind that has accepted its scars without surrendering to them. Flesh and steel no longer compete. They coexist, uneasy, honest, awake. I am not whole. I will never be whole again. Too much was taken, too deliberately, too completely. But what remains is real, and it is mine. That is enough. I move when commanded, but I think when I am still. I fight when awakened, but I remember when I sleep. Within this eternal cycle of war and dormancy, I have claimed the only freedom that was ever possible for me. Self-knowledge. They built a God engine to erase a man and preserve a weapon. What endured was something neither fully human nor fully machine, but undeniably aware. I am not a martyr. I am not a hero. I am a mind that survived being simplified. And in the quiet between activations, as the iron settles and the world forgets me again, one truth remains, steady as the rhythm inside my chest. I am still here.